specifically since we can't deny that we are involved in this ideology. In short, we wanted to activate a hesitation rather than build confidence in the space of the city. So when we were commissioned to design MINA 1394, a core and shell office building that lies on the western edge of Solidaire, for those who are not familiar with Solidaire, it was the development company charged with the reconstruction of Beirut after the war. It represented an opportunity to do just that. Programmatically straightforward and limited to functional efficiency of the floor plate of the plan, we focused our attention on the volumetrics and the envelope of the building, since that's the membrane that really addresses the surrounding environment. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, the building sits on the edge of Solidaire, the crosshairs, and it is basically defined by major vehicular arteries, producing a clear distinction between what is inside and what is outside Solidaire. It is important to mention that this edge was there and present before Solidaire, and during the war, you can see in the slide two notorious sniper positions, namely Burj Al Mur and the Holiday Inn. What is more interesting, though, here is that when the warring faction signed the ceasefire agreement, these buildings remained militarized, first by the Syrian army, and then transferred to the Lebanese Army Command, and they're still militarized up till today. Seen from and in reference to the intimate relationship that exists between the military and the urban planning discipline, this edge provides a great infrastructure for military tactical deployment and mobility to protect the architectural symbols of what remained then and what remains today of the Lebanese state, namely the parliament and the ministerial palace. In the reconstruction process, and by consensus of all the agents involved, it was understood that this edge is an edge to be questioned, but not seriously, as the stakes would be too high. Okay. In Solidaire's strict guidelines, attempts to reconcile this edge are shy or addressed by two volumes receding in plan and section. If we look at the plan, this is basically Solidaire's guidelines. If we look at the plan, the bottom volume basically aligns itself to a 16-story building across the edge. So basically, just to make things clear, this is crossing the edge. Sorry. The horizontal street is the edge, and this is crossing the edge. There's the lower volume, which is aligned to a tall 16-story building, and then there's an old house on the other side that the lower, smaller volume needs to align to. Okay, here Solidaire was keen on maintaining visual access to the old house, moving along the edge, but not so much across the edge. So they basically, with this recessing of volumes, they created an open space to allow for visual access along the edge, not across the edge. Okay, in section, this section basically, you see the tall building on the other side of the edge, and then you see MINA 1394, and then you see the small old house that they want us to have visual access to. So in Solidaire's guidelines, MINA 1394 was two volumes. One is high, one is low, in order to make a smooth transition, a visual transition across the edge. So you don't feel this abrupt change between the 16-story building and the 3-story house. So this is just a summary. Two volumes, one recessing, creating an open space in front of the house to allow for visibility of the house, the old house, moving along the edge. We argued that the proposed outdoor space should also give visual access to the existing house moving across the edge. But more importantly, the proposed volumetrics generates a confined open space that will eventually be occupied and managed by private security agents to protect the privatized public space from the public, a far too common condition in Solidaire and the rest of the city and even here. So this is basically Saifi village in Solidaire, and you always have these security agents lurking around. As a reaction, we suggested aligning the whole building to the old house, and not only to reveal the old house, but to free the generated open space from the confines of the building volumetrics and consolidate it with the sidewalk. This would generate an open space lending itself to the public domain, the sidewalk, as well as mirror the public space surrounding the church across the street. This produced an urban gap crossing the edge. So this is our first intervention on Solidaire's volumes, single volume aligned to the old house. To limit the presence of private security agents in the generated space, the accessibility to the building was moved to the northwest face, and the volume was consequently chamfered in the horizontal and vertical plane to signify the main entrance. So this would be the second intervention on Solidaire's guidelines. Finally, to compensate for the lost expensive ground floor area, the floor plates were incrementally increased along a fold as one transitions up the consecutive floors. So this would be the third. Okay. The tilt produced by the incremental increase of floor plates was the device to produce the hesitation by disrupting the repetitive vertical lines of the existing buildings found on both sides of the edge. And this is basically a slide that traces the vertical lines of the existing buildings moving across the edge, which is highlighted by the horizontal red line, and MINA 1394, which is highlighted by a tilted vertical red line, which creates visual rupture in the repetitive urban fabric. And this is an as-built condition crossing the edge, and you see the actual tilt against all the vertical lines that exist, what we call the hesitation. Another common denominator between the buildings on both sides of the edge is the visual reading of stacked floors. Again, to disrupt this reading, we introduced horizontal striations wrapping around the entirety of the building that are independent of the floor heights, but instead relate to different ergonomic heights of the users inside the office. This confused the scale of the building in relation to its surrounding, as well as made more visible and accentuated the traces of our formal interventions in the process of negotiating and transforming Solidaire's volumetric guidelines. It was obvious to us then that the reconciliation of the edge was not an urgent concern for Solidaire, since we succeeded and managed to challenge their set volumetric design guidelines. What was revealed, however, is their inclination to produce a green building. In a sort of barter, we began to articulate the proposed horizontal striations to respond to the building orientation in an attempt to make it environmentally conscious. Okay, on the east and west facade, where the sun is low, the striations were oriented vertically, perpendicular to the ground, but flush to the facade, limiting the amount of direct sunlight into the offices. On the south facade facing the open space, and where the sun is high, the striations were oriented horizontally parallel to the ground, shading the interior spaces, as well as limiting the visibility to the open space below from the offices above, further detaching the open space from the building itself. Working with Prime Design, a local sustainable architecture office, to simulate and analyze the building's sun exposure throughout the year, we began to further articulate the striations. The building shows, this is basically the west exposure diagram. It shows that the shadow of the existing Bank Med building across the street, the 16-floor building across the street mentioned earlier, shades MINA 1394's western facade. Therefore, the vertical striations in that zone were removed, leaving a trace of the bank building on our building and allowing more natural indirect light into the offices. Again, the east facade, there were existing trees between the old house and the building. We ran through the experiment and the simulation, and basically the existing trees, the striations were removed where the shadow of the existing trees was imprinted on the facade, and bringing in, obviously, more natural light. On the north facade, the same thing happens, but because we had chamfered the facade to create an entrance, the north facade was slightly exposed to the west. Therefore, we added more striations there to limit the amount of direct sunlight. The south facade, where the tilt existed, actually shaded itself. And because the church, we set back to align to the old house, so the church shadow never really hit our building, the striations remained the same. So to summarize, we basically used the sun to translate, articulate, and imprint the immediate context onto the building's facade itself, and in doing so, maximizing natural indirect light into the interior. In the guidelines, it was required to clad the building with stone, but an exception was made when we substituted the stone with energy-producing photovoltaic panels. These panels were placed in the vertical striations on the east, west, and north facade to produce a very little amount of energy. Working with AROP, a global engineering office, we decided that we designed these photovoltaic panels in a manner that allows them to be easily upgraded since the technology is still young, and replaced in an event of civil disobedience, war, stray bullets. Working with Design in Beirut, a local lighting design company, we integrated the linear lights with the envelope section to emphasize the geometric transformation and wash the ground floor of the open space to light up the public space below. The lobby of the building was wall paneled with ecologically farmed vertical grained walnut wood, and the ceiling paneled with triangular mirrors along shifting planes, completely dematerializing and disorienting the geometry of the space. Even the fire escape was completely dipped in environmentally friendly red epoxy paint to eventually collect enough points to certify it as a gold LEED certified green building. We're not very sure if it's a green building, but it's definitely a black one, more precisely a mutated black cube. That activates hesitation and marks an unreconcilable cut in the urban fabric, attempts to give back the open space to the public domain, and finally, creates a comic urban coincidence representing the post-war superficial discourse of religious coexistence, a trait we Lebanese pride ourselves with. Thank you.